Hi, I'm Sonal Srivastava, a security researcher in Microsoft's MSRC. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Okay, so I'm a security researcher at Microsoft's MSRC. And if you have ever submitted a report to MSRC, there are decent chances that I assessed it, either calling it by design or flagging it as critical. That range pretty much explains why it is still fun to study excesses in 2026. Okay. So my work spans web and cloud vulnerability research, understanding how systems break in real time, how attackers chain these small vulnerabilities into high impact, and which defenses truly survive real world pressure. Excesses is one such area where we see this pattern appearing again and again. It's been 25 years and excesses hasn't gone away. It has adapted to the way the systems are built today. We are seeing attack paths which our traditional defenses are not meant to um, defend against. So these attack paths, um, they bypass our usual mitigation, they bypass the cross-boundary trust, and the trust decision that developers assume are safe. A big part of my work is challenging those assumptions. And in this session, I will walk you through some examples that show how excesses evolves when the systems get more complex. So let's demystify which mitigations fail, which ones consistently work, and how to avoid the traps we still see across large platforms. So before getting into the details, I'm going to cover some basics. As I said, it is a 25-year-old vulnerability with browsers hardened, content security policy widespread, frameworks safer, but excesses persist. Because modern applications are complex, trust chains are messy, and developers put defense in the wrong layer. Understanding the evolving nature of excesses is critical to defending modern web ecosystem. For reference, MITRE Corporation still has put excesses on the top of their list for CWE Top 25 for 2025. So what is cross-site scripting? Cross-site scripting is a web security vulnerability that occurs when a website accidentally treats user-controlled data as code, letting an attacker run their script inside the victim's browser. So excesses occurs when untrusted data is rendered as executable code in the browser, allowing attackers to run scripts within the app's origin. So all we need is a vulnerable app with some way to ask user to provide us an input, let's say first name, last name in a form. And if they provide a JavaScript and the application accepts it, the server will render it and send it back as HTML, and the victim's browser is going to execute it. So that is how the flow might look like. And we are going to discuss this in detail. So what does an attacker benefit from excesses? So it enables the attacker to steal session cookies or tokens, perform actions on behalf of victim, deface pages, or redirect users, access sensitive data that is exposed to the web client. There are three types of excesses: stored or persistent excesses, reflected non-persistent excesses, or document object model, DOM-based excesses. So first two, the malicious payload goes to the server, and it is defined based on if it is stored or not stored by the server. Whereas the third one is little different. DOM-based accesses happens only, everything happens on the client side. The payload never touches the server at all. We will discuss again this in a bit. So starting with stored accesses. So idea here is the malicious payload is going to be saved by the vulnerable web application somewhere in the backend. So let's say maybe in a database server. And every time any user comes to this vulnerable application, they interact with it, the malicious payload is loaded into the application from the database and it is served to the user. So the payload is saved once by the application and served to anyone who is visiting that website or web page. So idea here is the malicious payload is stored. Whereas in reflected accesses, malicious payload or script is sent in a request to the server, which is reflected right away in the response from the server. It is not stored anywhere. So the attack only exists in the request response cycle. Now, as I said, DOM-based accesses is little different. The malicious data is processed entirely in the browser of the client side. Okay, so the DOM on the client side, not on the server. The untrusted data comes somewhere from the DOM environment itself. It could be location.hash, document.url, anything, but it is not from the server. So the JavaScript on the page reads that DOM value and it writes it unsafely back into the DOM, causing the execution. So the idea here is the vulnerability lives in the client side, not the backend. A simple flow, just describing what I just said. So in the stored accesses, attacker submits malicious script, which is then stored by the database, let's say. And then this malicious script is rendered by the server and thrown back to the victim's browser where it gets parsed and it gets the accesses gets executed. So the script is stored on the server and served to all the users. Whereas in reflected accesses, the attacker has to create some kind of malicious link, and they have to use some channel to send that link to the victim user for them to click on it. It could be message, email, whatever. Once they click on the link, the HTTP request is sent to the server, which has the malicious payload, which our server responds back, and then it gets executed on the browser side. So script is reflected off the server and runs in victim's browser. It is not stored anywhere. Whereas in DOM, as we saw, user visits this vulnerable website. Malicious payload manipulates DOM with JavaScript. Okay, the script never reaches the server. It is executed on the browser side again. So a script is not sent to the server. It runs directly in victim's browser via DOM manipulation. All right, time for the exciting part. So I'm going to go through some real-world case studies that we saw in MSRC. I'm just bringing in the educational part without referring exact cases and details. So we will walk through how these attacks work end-to-end, dig into the actual root causes, and compare partial fixes with defenses that truly close the gap. First one here is about stored accesses. We had this Cloud Society, Microsoft.com, which is deprecated now. It was once vulnerable to stored accesses. Here, if you go to this URL and create an account, you can start a discussion, you can post things, and interact with other people on the forum. So if you intercept this create discussion HTTP request with any interception tool of your choice, let's say Burp, and inject the post request body with malicious payload, and then we are going to post it. So this payload is going to persist and it will later execute when a victim interacts with the stored content. Let's look into the payload itself. This is a HTTP post request. On the top, you can see it is going to this endpoint, and this is our host. This is the part of the post body wherein we have this multi-part form field. And in this multi-part form field, we have this anchor tag, right? We use anchor tag to link things, right? And in this href, we are using JavaScript as a scheme. I assume some of you might already be rolling eyes seeing JavaScript used as href. And we will discuss why it is the problem here in a bit. So I don't know if this is very clear to everyone. I can zoom it, but it is the flow of what we just discussed. So attacker is going to open a create discussion. They are going to use this HTTP post going to the endpoint. They are going and they are using Burp to intercept this request, and they are going to put their payload in this post request body. And then they are going to forward the request to the web application. And this is where the problem lies, because our web application is not sanitizing or validating the user input. It is saving it as is in our storage DB. So our application stores it in our storage DB. Now, when a victim comes and they click on that discussion to look into what's inside it, the application goes about loading the stored body, and storage DB responds with the stored HTML, whatever the payload our attacker provided. And then our web application is not performing any kind of server-side validation either. It responds back with the rendered body as HTML. Victim clicks on it, and JavaScript is passed and executed on the victim side. Now, in this example, I think we use document.cookie. So document.cookie is a JavaScript API which helps read, write, modify cookies. So if they will just run a quick fetch with the attacker controlled URL plus document.cookie, so we are going to get the cookie of this session being sent to the attacker. Okay, so what we just saw was the unsafe rendering path, which led to successful XSS execution. When attacker submitted the discussion and the malicious body parameter, server received the input. It stored it as raw HTML in the database. And then when the discussion was rendered, server responded it as to the victim as HTML executable, which the victim clicked, and XSS is executed in site origin. Now, instead of doing that, what would have been a safe path? If we store the user control data as text, not as raw HTML, first thing, in the database. And then when it is rendered by the server, it should be HTML encoded. So we are performing server-side encoding on the output, so that the HTML is not executed, it is displayed as text. There's no execution, right? But then there are scenarios where we need our HTML. We cannot turn it into text. In those cases, we should go with sanitization. So we should perform input sanitization on our user control data. So HTML sanitizer is the way to go. We should be mindful of looking into tag allow list, HTML attribute allow list, and schemes allow list. In this scenario that we just saw, the problem was we were not looking into the scheme allow list. We were using JavaScript scheme in href. If we will do our sanitization properly, the database will have sanitized HTML, and when it will be rendered, only the safe HTML will be rendered and no execution will happen. So these are the two ways we can actually render it safely. So summarizing it all, what are some unsafe mitigation that still fails? Stripping only script tag. So there are dozen other vectors malicious attacker can use: on error, SVG, and the one that we saw here, JavaScript in href, right? So stripping off only script tag is not going to help. It is a partial mitigation. Now getting into the detail of the payload that we saw in this example. So we allowed anchor tag href, but we didn't validate scheme. We used JavaScript for href. Href is used to actually navigate somewhere. If you are not using a link, a proper required URL scheme, then it is going to run whatever user control JavaScript is coming to it. Okay, so using JavaScript URL inside anchor tag is insecure, deprecated, and dangerous. It leads to remote code execution. It is a DOM XSS sink. We need to validate our scheme inside href. And we need to understand, unlike normal links, JavaScript URL runs with full DOM access, cookie access, token access, local storage access. So if attacker or a user can run their controlled script inside your href, they are going to get all of these access. Then coming to client-side encoding only. So client-side encoding only protects the current rendering path, not the future path. The server still sees and stores the actual malicious HTML. Client-side coding only affects the current browser instance display. Server-side encoding actually looks into controls what the server stores and ultimately renders. So only server-side encoding reliably prevents excesses. So what are the real mitigation? Performing server-side output encoding by default, considering text as user control data as text and not executable or HTML. And if HTML is required, then sanitize with tag allow list, attribute allow list. And if you are having URL scheme, then make sure that you are actually using HTTPS, HTTP, which are the real event listener for the URL, which will actually help you navigate somewhere. Explicitly block JavaScript, data, VB script. They will just allow user controlled script to be run inside your href. Good. Moving on to reflected accesses. In this example, we have this query parameter named domain name, which is vulnerable, where you can add your accesses payload. And when you put this query parameter with the URL on the top, you have this malicious link that you have crafted. Now you can send this malicious URL to the victim. When the victim clicks on the URL, the accesses executes. So if we look at the flow, attacker sends the crafted sign up link containing domain name, which is our vulnerable query parameter. They add their payload to it. Victim clicks the link and sends HTTP GET request with the domain name with a payload as is in the request to this vulnerable app. Vulnerable app, again, not performing any kind of sanitization or encoding. It returns the HTML response back to the victim browser, where the browser parses and renders the response, and the script again gets executed, and we have a successful accesses. Oopsie, sorry. Now, as we saw, this is unsafe rendering. We are not performing any kind of encoding here, and so our accesses executes. For safe rendering, again, it is suggested to use output encoding. Once it is HTML encoded, the data will not be displayed, executed. It will be displayed as text. Another thing that we can do for parameters like domain name, redirect URI, we can have a allow list, and we can validate the domain format that is expected. So defense in depth. So once you have a allow list for such parameters and you encode it, you have done enough to have your defenses ready. Coming to unsafe mitigations that still fail. So as I said, we need to perform server-side encoding. But here we have to understand that the browser have different context. And we need to understand the context in order to understand what encoding is required. Okay? So using wrong encoding for wrong context is not going to help you. It is still partial mitigation. So performing all kind of encoding without understanding the context is not extra safe. It is incorrect and sometimes dangerous. Different rendering context in the browser require different encoding. If you use the wrong one, the browser decodes it differently than you expect. And attacker-controlled characters still break out of the intended context. So what I mean here is, like, if you use URL encoding for HTML context, it won't stop script tag because URL encoding has no meaning inside HTML markup. Same way, if you use HTML encoding for JavaScript context, our JavaScript does not care about angular bracket. It cares about quotes, escapes, and where the string ends. So in this example, you can see we have attacker providing this payload. We have quote, semicolon, alert, one, right? And we perform HTML encoding on it. So our code got converted into a literal ampersand QOT colon. Now, when it reaches browser, the browser interprets this inside JavaScript context. So it decodes the literal ampersand QOT back to quote. The injected code closes the string and remaining JavaScript executes as is. So you can see our HTML encoding couldn't prevent excesses because it was rendered inside JavaScript context. So what should we do? What are the real mitigation? So we should understand our sink, our context, and try to encode before hitting the sink as close to the sink as possible. So for HTML text, you will perform HTML entity encoding. For HTML attribute, you are going to perform attribute encoding, JavaScript encoding, URL or component encoding. And if you are using DOM sync, which you'll be, so you have to use the safe DOM APIs like text content instead of inner HTML, which is a vulnerable DOM API or unsafe. So this diagram actually shows what happens when we have all the preventions in place. So attacker is sending this crafted link with domain name. Server renders the query parameter domain name. It validates it against allow list. So it checks for if the domain name is in the format that is required, expected FAQD and pattern length, car set, and all of that. Then it renders with context-aware encoding. Again, as said, JavaScript for JavaScript, HTML for HTML encoding, attribute. And at the runtime, we have content security policies set and trusted type supported. So we are going to discuss more about CSPs in a bit. So third case study was about a DOM-based excesses. Here our attacker, he is hosting a malicious open API spec, let's say a JSON file containing malicious payload. And this is our payload, image tag with inline event handler on error. So he creates a URL to the malicious spec and passes it as a value for query parameter config URL. So if you look at this URL, some of you might be familiar with Swagger UI. Is there anyone who knows about Swagger UI? So you might already know Swagger, for rest of you, Swagger UI is a front-end documentation viewer built in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It dynamically fetches API spec and converts it into API console. A major DOM excesses vulnerability affected all of Swagger UI between 3.14 to 3.38 version. So we will see how this vulnerable Swagger UI actually leads to DOM excesses here. So victim clicks on the above link. You can see this config URL parameter here is pulling attacker's evil spec. And then the vulnerable Swagger UI fetches the attacker's spec in the victim's browser and the excesses executes. Here, the point to be noted is that config URL is fetching and executing the attacker's spec in the victim's browser. It is never going to the server. That is why it is DOM excesses. So why is this Swagger UI vulnerable? For first thing, it uses unsafe sync inner HTML. Okay. So to render these blocks. So inner HTML, the problem with inner HTML is it parses the string as HTML, as an executable. That means browser treats content as markup, not text. So any escaped HTML that becomes real markup will be executed. So main problem here is using inner HTML, which is unsafe DOM sync. Now then, Swagger UI does have DOM purify for sanitization. However, this version was outdated and failed to sanitize malicious field as it has excesses bypasses. That was the reason that DOM excesses was successful here. Let's look into the flow of the attack. So attacker hosts malicious open API spec. They have their HTML inside it, and then sends the crafted link to the victim browser. Victim browser loads Swagger UI with attacker config URL. Swagger UI fetches the config URL and then renders the spec using inner HTML. There is DOM Purify, but it is outdated and failed, which injects the payload into the DOM, and then it gets executed, and we can see all the impact that a DOM excesses has. Now here we need to understand, in the case of DOM excesses, it is very important to understand our safe versus unsafe sync. Some of the unsafe sync are inner HTML document.write event attribute. Even if you are performing your HTML encoding or using DOM Purify and not using safe sync, there are chances that the browser is going to reinterpret the payload as the string, and DOM excesses will still be possible. However, if you use safe sync, that will be a full mitigation. So safe syncs are text content, create element, safe attribute setters, and then performing context-aware encoding using modern sanitizers like DOM Purify, and then having strict CSP will actually prevent the DOM excesses. So as I said, summarizing, what are some unsafe mitigation that still fail? Using a sanitizer, but not using, using unsafe sync like inner HTML, using wrong encoding, outdated DOM Purify, or using it at default setting. Another thing that we have to be mindful of is understanding our framework directives. So there are many frameworks which safely escape double curly braces, but the triple braces or raw HTML directive is intentionally designed to output HTML as is, which means if attacker can control the data inside these triple braces, it is a direct DOM excesses. So the mitigation that still help are eliminating unsafe syncs. So instead of inner HTML, use text content. Text content never interprets user-controlled string as HTML, only as plain text. So it is the correct sync when you want to display user-controlled data safely. Document.write, don't use document.write, use create element. Don't use set attribute event. It is inline script sync that turns strings into code and defeats our CSP. So instead, you can use add event listener with vetted functions, and keep all your untrusted data as text, not as executable strings. Then trusted types. So trusted types is a browser-enforced security feature that prevents unsafe strings from ever reaching dangerous DOM APIs. So instead of letting any arbitrary string flow into those things, trusted type forces the application to provide special trusted objects created only by approved sanitization functions. So it helps the parent frame from making unsafe DOM decisions after receiving the malicious data. Okay, so far whatever we saw was traditional excesses and traditional defenses. Now what I'm going to cover is modern excesses, and modern excesses stems from broken trust boundaries and insecure cross-component communication rather than traditional payload injection. Let's examine the next two case studies to understand what are these trust boundaries and how to defend them. In this first scenario, both of my examples are going to be from cloud. So we have this setup in the cloud. The first one, we are single tenant. There is just one company. They have their collaboration platform, and they are going to use it for their own purpose. No other cross-tenant complications here. The core problem in this scenario is going to be that we have this built-in file viewer app inside the collaboration platform. So on the collaboration platform, you can imagine you can share messages, files, and whatever. So we have this built-in file viewer app inside the collaboration platform, and this file viewer app is really powerful. It is overprivileged. It is pre-authorized to fetch tokens, call APIs. And this file viewer app is going to trust any page under a broad domain of family, let's say platform, anything under platform.com. When a user opens a file, it loads inside file viewer and it inherits its privileges. So everything that we just said, it will inherit all of that. So imagine again, you're in this single tenant, no cross tenant complexity, just your team, your files, collaboration space, everything safe so far. Now, a low privilege user, which is also going to be our attacker, creates a simple HTML page, maybe a custom help page or a demo page. They generate a public sharing link so that their teammates can quickly open it. No authentication required, no friction, nice and smooth. Your collaboration platform has a built-in file viewer app, as we just saw, and it is powerful, I just mentioned. So it is more powerful than it visually appear because it is pre-authorized. It can hold privileged tokens. It can call internal APIs on the behalf of the user, and it can open any file, anything that the user can, viewer can do. So whenever you open a file or link inside the platform, this viewer is the one rendering it. The viewer trusts any content under the broad domain umbrella, and this is where the mistake lies. Because attacker controlled HTML page, the one she hosted, also sits under the same umbrella of platform.com. Even though she authored it, even though it contains a script, even though it was not built by platform's engineering team, the viewer still treats it as first party, trusted and privileged. So when another user on the tenant, let's say our admin, opens the shared link inside the platform, the viewer loads the HTML page. The HTML page contains attacker-controlled JavaScript. The viewer grants it same privileges the viewer itself has. Now the script can access resources that the attacker-generated page should never touch. It can invoke powerful APIs, potentially access chat, metadata files. The page isn't malicious in appearance, but the trust model is. This is not a classic excesses. This is where text, there is no text, there is no input injection. It is platform level excesses, a breakdown of trust boundaries inside a single tenant. A simple HTML file, once loaded inside the privileged viewer, becomes high privileged actor, not because it hacked anything, just because the platform trusted it too broadly. So, as I said, this is how the flow might look like. Our attackers sharing the public share link. This is our viewer. This is the iframe, which is trusting the domain and loading that page. Again, this is the flow if you want to look into it. Now, as I said, our traditional defenses are not going to help against these trust boundary excesses. And how are they going to fail? Let's see them one by one. Server-side output encoding. Encoding stops text from being passed as HTML or JavaScript in your DOM. Here, you are not inserting text. You are embedding a whole page. Encoding can't stop privileged module accesses. The browser loads the attacker HTML directly from the network. The encoding logic never runs on it. No encoding helps because the attacker abused trust and capabilities, not text parsing. Second one is input sanitization. So the danger here is not HTML. It is that untrusted page executes directly inside a privileged context. So if trust is misconfigured or is too broad, sanitization is irrelevant. Even perfect sanitizer only sanitizes HTML, not the privileged API surface. Sanitizers only transform markup, not capability boundaries. Then comes CSP. Our CSP or content security policy cannot save you either because it is a trusted module accesses. You are already trusting the source. Then this one is again important one because we keep on hearing from developers that they assume if they are using iframe, they are safe. A non-sandboxed iframe is dangerous. It is part of the exploit. It is not a defense. So in this exploit pattern, the iframe or the web view is not sandbox and it inherits or exposes privileged API. Right? When the browser simply loads the attacker's entire document verbatim, the iframe is the delivery channel for the attacker code, not a defense. A plain iframe with no sandbox attribute can run arbitrary JavaScript, can fully execute a script inside its own document. It is not blocked from messaging or invoking APIs that the parent page is allowed to, and is often treated as trusted content by the hosting module. So inside a iframe does not stop script execution. Fifth one is trusted domains. So location-based trust is not a security boundary. Deep link validation. So deep link is a URI or URL that opens the app directly into a specific screen or state, carrying the user straight to the intended in-app experience. So that is why our files or file in this case always opens inside the viewer. So deep link validation can only validate the format of the link. This does not stop untrusted content from loading. So these are the prevention which are still not going to prevent our trust boundary excesses. So what will? So in this scenario, we need to understand our trust boundary, our capability boundary, and defend against that. It is not about content sanitization here. The first thing we need to do is remove wildcard trust. Use allow list of exact URLs, per resource trust, not per domain trust. Verified app to resource binding. Then enforce strong sandboxing for embedded content. This one is important. Any content that can be user controlled must be sandboxed. Use sandbox iframes with script disabled, no ability to request tokens, no access to privileged APIs, no navigation out of the sandbox. And you have to set your CSP boundaries as well. Then the third one is least privilege app capabilities. The privilege module should not expose broad token acquisition capabilities. It should not have high value scopes or should not be able to call internal or workspace APIs. It should not have capabilities that are not required for core functioning. The fourth one, which is important again, is split your design. So separate viewer context from privileged context. So what I mean here, viewer frame will only show user content, safe, sandboxed, no permissions. Whereas privileged core will perform the privileged action but never renders untrusted HTML or JavaScript. So this helps you create a trust boundary between display and capability. Now, fifth one is enforce strict token acquisition rules. This will help you with mitigating token theft, require user gestures for high value token request, block token issuance inside embedded iframes, enforce origin binding of token, apply context checks like only the top level trusted app can request this token. So in this attack that we saw, the attacker loads their page in a high trust module. Their JavaScript runs automatically. It silently calls API to request tokens. The app happily hands over sensitive tokens, and attacker steals them, and then they can call the backend pretending to be the victim, right? So when you require a trusted user gesture, attacker JavaScript can no longer do all that. The platform will block it. So background or automatic JavaScript execution will not be able to satisfy user gesture requirement. The last one here is privileged module. Enforce strict tenant affinity on privileged module. So the privileged module should operate only within their own tenant, and it should refuse to load any cross-tenant resources. We should scrub any deep links that are pointing outside the tenant. This is how unsafe rendering versus safe rendering might look. Unsafe rendering, the module loads the remote content, untrusted content, runs it inside non-sandbox frame. Then it can call privileged API, get high value token, and attacker can perform actions as victim. Whereas in safe rendering, we are only loading the vetted in-tenant resource inside a sandbox, which has no JavaScript, no API calling capability. It cannot invoke a privileged API or privileged SDKs. The token and capabilities are protected, and hence the privileged actions can only be trusted. Now, in my second example, I have this combination of friendly preview and over-trusting parent, which will lead to cross-tenant failure. So here, imagine there are completely separate companies, tenant A and tenant B. They don't know each other. They don't share data. They are just using a very large cloud platform with an editor that lets people upload file and preview them. An attacker in tenant A uploads what looks like a harmless help article, let's say attachment, and it has a public preview link, something that platform gives you automatically so that you can share drafts without logging in. So nothing unusual yet, except that the attacker's file is actually HTML full of JavaScript because the platform treats user uploaded HTML as normal content. It stores it and it serves it back when required as is. So this is where our stored accesses vector lies. Now imagine this help article editor is being used by tenant B. It loads the preview file inside a iframe and uses post message to talk to that frame. I will briefly cover what post message is. So post message is a method which safely enables cross-origin communication between Windows objects like a page and a pop-up that it spawned, or a page and an iframe embedded within it. So the post message by itself does not authenticate the sender. So you have to add logic to do that. To stay safe, our tenant B does check where the message comes from, but the origin check is very loose regex. Basically, it is just checking for anything that ends with platform.com. So as long as the attacker hosts their malicious file anywhere under the giant umbrella of platform.com, it is accepted as trusted. And because the preview link is built on that domain, it passes. The parent editor never realizes it's talking to an attacker. A user in tenant B clicks the preview link. Maybe they found the link in some customer support ticket or somewhere. The preview loads inside the iframe and the attacker script executes. It sends a crafted post message that looks exactly like legitimate command. Because the origin check is too broad, the parent editor treats it as coming from inside the same tenant, even though the attacker belongs to another company entirely. Now, malicious file can trigger actions, manipulate content, trick the UI, and perform other actions, right? All of this without the attacker ever logging into tenants B's organization. So, what looked like a simple preview your upload file feature actually created a cross-tenant stored accesses bridge. Here, the source of stored accesses was attacker's HTML being stored permanently through the upload, and then a SaaS-style preview system where you can generate the URL. Delivery system was our preview iframe loads HTML with full script execution, and the trust break. The editor accepts attacker post message due to overly broad origin validation. So the impact here is one tenant's hostile file can actively manipulate UI in another tenant. Oh, sorry, I didn't move. So yeah, this is how the flow might look like. We are in tenant A, our attacker is sitting in tenant A, and this public URI here. Our iframe is the parent page is checking for the iframe source, but the origin check is very loose, and so it allows the HTML sitting in the broad domain. In the code, this is how the loose regex might look like. So origin ends with, we are just looking for anything that is under platform.com. This is the flow with the loose origin check. Instead of that, if we look for the exact trusted origin, that is the right way to go. So in code, so what do we, so all of the mitigation that failed for our first example will apply here as well. Output encoding, input sanitization, CSP, all of these are not going to help here either. The real mitigation that we have to perform is use strict origin equality. As I said earlier, post message by itself does not authenticate the sender. So the parent must first issue a strict origin check, exact match, no regex, no substring, no wildcard. So here we can see how it is looking for the exact string. Second thing that has to be done is the parent issued nonce. A parent issued nonce is random unguessable one-time token that parent window gives to its embedded iframe. And then it is going, the child iframe is always going to use that nonce in the rest of the interaction. The last one here is only trusting the exact iframe that you created at runtime, not any page from a domain, not any iframe with same URL, or not any random frame that happens to message you. This says only accepts message from the exact iframe I spawn. It helps you defend against iframe navigation attacks, frame replacement attacks, or pop-up spoofing attacks. At last, I would just like to cover how content security policy is a very good defense in depth, but it is not mitigation by itself. And there are places where it can help you block JavaScript execution, but then the places where it won't. So it can help you block inline script, which comes from script tag or inline event handler like onClick and so on. It can help you block external script coming from untrusted sources, like you can use set your script source. It will block eval style dynamic execution. It will block unapproved resource loading and certain outbound calls. But CSPs cannot block unsafe DOM sync inside your allowed JavaScript bundle. DOM accesses that happens inside your own JS, not via new script resource. It cannot block that. It cannot block logical DOM accesses like post message we just saw or over trusted apps that we saw. Okay. It cannot block injection into execution context inside JavaScript. So when injection happens inside a JavaScript string, the browser is not evaluating new script via script tag or inline handler. It is simply your already allowed script which CSP permits because the file is from allowed source. Then having trusted and vulnerable first-party scripts, it cannot stop running that. Or having misconfigured or lax CSP configuration, like using unsafe inline, unsafe eval, all of those will not help CSP block anything. So CSP is effective at reducing excesses volume, but it alone isn't durable for eliminating modern excesses. I would like to thank my colleague Jilakshi, Cameron, and Callum, some of whose work I used in this presentation. I would wrap it up by saying modern excesses isn't about clever payload anymore. It is about breaking hidden trust boundaries inside complex, composable web application. Real defense comes from fixing those boundaries and pairing architecture level hardening with tactical context aware controls. Thank you.